change his mind and decide that he is going to sack one of his officials if that's the way to put the end to hostile headlines. That's the way things tend to operate here at the White House.
Well, let's talk some more about this now. I'm joined live by former Director for European Affairs on the US National Security Council and Senior Advisor to Vote Vets, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. Thank you for joining us here on BBC News. Now, when you worked for the National Security Council, you would have had security clearance, obviously, access to classified material. What we've seen with this Signal app, is that the usual way to have done business in your experience?
I've seen nothing like this before. Signal is one of those things where if you're in a position where you have no other options, you would want to, and you'd want to still have some sort of encrypted communication, you could have non-sensitive conversations. But even so, there's an obligation if they're official correspondence, official discussions, you're supposed to take a record of those and save those as part of the Records Act. What was discussed here couldn't be more sensitive. I mean, there's maybe I think if you're talking about nuclear, of course, that would be more sensitive. But if you're talking about an ongoing active military operation before it's executed with the chance that it could get somehow spilled into the public sphere, in this case, a journalist observed the conversation, that could have cost troops lives. We really dodged a bullet on this one, that it wasn't some other individual that wasn't splashing it all over the internet as these planes were striking targets in Yemen. But even the diplomatic content of this conversation is highly secret, and it's deliberation internal to the executive branch. And it's embarrassing and frankly harming our relationships with both our allies, as well as inspiring our adversaries to sow discord. So this was all total an extremely sensitive conversation that should have never taken place on this commercial messaging chat. It should have occurred behind closed doors with all these topics being discussed in the process where the president made the decision to strike the targets in Yemen, let alone as an afterthought because things weren't adequately covered in that meeting.
Now, there are a few issues here that have been raised today. One is obviously the adding of the journalist, which we're told was inadvertent, and there's an investigation underway as to how that happened. But also the actual security of these conversations, as you've been discussing there. And we've learned at least two of the alleged participants, the person identified as Tulsi Gabbard and the person identified as Steve Witkoff, were overseas when these conversations were happening, Witkoff in Russia at the time. Does that escalate the risks of using a non-government system like that when parties are not even within the United States?
Well, in Russia, it's a near-peer cyber threat. It has the most advanced capabilities outside of the United States and a small number of other countries. So, of course, if he was using that phone, he could have easily compromised himself, and it's something that might be enduring. It might not be just what was communicated in that snapshot in that conversation while he was in Russia. The Russians could have easily seeded his devices. But it's unclear whether he actually had it on or had it with him. Protocol suggests that he actually doesn't bring his personal official devices with them. They're stored and secure so that they can't be compromised. But who knows, with the cavalier attitude that they've taken towards security, dismissing the fact that this was a highly sensitive topics, and trying to claim that there's nothing to see here. And the suggestion is that there are actually probably other groups, because they had to specifically label this one Houthi PC small group, Houthi principles small group. That implies that there might be other small group, PC small groups for other topics. That is deeply disturbing. In Russia's case, I'll just mention that by law, the Russian telecommunications firms are obligated to collect information from foreigners on their devices on anything that's not fully secured. So it is quite possible that if he had his device with him, that the Russians would have every incentive and potentially some ability to compromise those devices. So I hope that's something that's being looked at by the communicators.
Okay, now the CIA director and the director of national intelligence both said before that Senate hearing today that the material discussed was not classified, and even the fact that the defense secretary had introduced it himself essentially made it declassified. If that is the case, should the journalist Jeffrey Goldberg, who has not published that information to date because he fears it is classified, should he be able to publish that now without any fear of facing any legal jeopardy himself?
He could do that. I think Jeff is highly principled, and he wouldn't want to do anything that harms U.S. national security interests. I think there's a very, very good chance that if these are inquiries that are undertaken by the House and the Senate from an oversight perspective, they will see that, and they will see how sensitive these conversations are. It is a lie that these aren't sensitive conversations. These are highly sensitive conversations, and they're just using this kind of um, uh, um, classification authority excuse, meaning that these principals have the ability to classify and declassify. And because they didn't label it secret or top secret, that it's not classified. It is extremely sensitive. It is harmful to U.S. national security interests. And on that basis alone, it's classified.
And as you said, the tone of the discussions about allies such as the EU as well. We'll leave it there for the moment. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, thank you so much for joining us on BBC News.